With Tejo's impending kickoff debut, I wanted to take a minute to discuss my thoughts on his expected impact, as well as why, for my money, he's the strongest agent Valorant's ever seen. Now you may be thinking, hold up Anders, you rate Tejo higher than double nade raise, peak jet, and peak chamber? And frankly, I absolutely do, and I'll explain why. Something true of all great competitive game design is that at its core, it's fair and equitable. Or as more people will probably understand, that there are generally always opportunities for counterplay. Double nade raise offered counterplay in denying the kill reset, and jet and chamber could be countered by investing enough utility to tax out their untradeability. Some of you may remember, Fate even had to be nerfed because of how effectively Prowler countered chamber at the time. Something I've become more and more aware of in my last 5 years of cross-genre competition has been that while equity in design defines the range of acceptable in-game outcomes, the degree of agency that you give to your players is what differentiates the acceptable from the excellent. To get particular, when I'm talking about counterplay, I'm talking about literal means of interaction. Blocking, countering, preempting, disrupting. When I'm talking about agency, I mean the player's ability to make real, meaningful decisions about which of those roads they take. Ideally, having those decisions visibly reward the player in real time, even when those rewards aren't necessarily a win. Without providing sufficient agency to your players, you can end up with a game that's balanced on paper, but no sane person is going to want to play. You've stripped out all of the decisions and put the player on rails. In that regard, without enough agency, equity in your design ultimately has very little impact on the final gameplay experience. I'm going to make the case that while Tejo's kit does leave plenty of room for counterplay, it does so in a way that leaves the player with very little agency. Move or die, the tagline of the agent's release alludes to the simple nature of the questions posed by him. As an example of this, on Split B site, the theoretical counterplay here is to simply move, or to play varied enough positions that the Tejo salvo flush can't effectively dislodge you. In itself, this is perfectly okay, but when you add in other teammates, the complete absence of an executional skill check, him not needing a line of sight for the ability, and the ancillary value it can provide outside of the simple zone denial, things get much messier. For instance, this comp of Raze, Tejo, Vice, Breach, and Astra. Tejo barely adjusts his salvos, and you combine it with this whole suite of additional utility. Astra smoking both Tower and Dojo, as well as potentially Nova pulsing Shroud to the close left of main. You have Breach stunning, double flashing, and aftershocking, knowing that we can use Vice's utility in post-plant to proxy those flashes in. Vice herself being able to be completely gun out through the entire exec, along with Raze who gets to throw a nade back wood and then satchel out to new box. All of this combined creates a situation where there is really no playable space on site. The few places where you are allowed to be as a defender are fully flashed. And so in this situation, the Tejo hasn't asked you to move or die. Rather, he's just decided to work with his teammates to fully saturate the site and make all playable positions irrelevant. Our ability to potentially pursue those highly varied positions doesn't matter because they're all unavailable. Or at least they're all punished hard enough that even attempting to play them and sort of search for a high roll or a gap in utility isn't worth the attempt. The counterplay that we still have access to ends up being don't play in that space in the first place, or to hyperextend and attempt to disrupt our opponent before that utility can go down. So while under the strictest definitions this does have counterplay, it does so in a way where you have two real options, one of which is so high variance that you can't call it on a consistent basis over the course of a half, so you're really only left with one decision that you can pull out at any given time. That's a non-decision. If giving your opponents no decision sounds nice to you, well, you can do that and support me at the same time via my Patreon. On that Patreon, you'll find tier lists that I release with every patch, over 2 years of Premier-focused playbooks, and options for limited availability coaching. You can find a link to that and my community Discord in the description. Now, Tejo's denial of agency obviously causes issues on execs, but it somehow gets worse in post-plant. Harkening back to that non-necessity for line of sight, Tejo gets to do absolutely disgusting things in that he can insulate himself and play for defuse denial in a way that really is only beatable via suppression or preemptive push-through flanks. Breaking down a post for that same composition, we have access to a suck, a salvo, we have a razor vine on plant, we have an on-site rose and shear for post plant, we've got stall vines towards spawn, we get a re-up smoke, and then we have, you know, all of the actual guns we get to point at our opponents. Now, do I think we'll always have 5 alive in post? Absolutely not, but as we just showed, we're probably going positive on exec because they're not allowed to play anywhere. And as if this wasn't enough of a rabbit hole already, we also have the value that he can provide on default because, you know, this is on a 40-second cooldown. Depending on our read on our opponent, as well as where we're at in the macro flow, you can position your Tejo either sewers or ramen and have a range of salvos that can clear almost every initial peek and forward swing on the map, as well as clear out the majority of common pre-play sentinel utility locations. If you happen to be playing a Vice and your shear is indestructible, congratulations, you're totally fine. If you're playing a Cypher, well, you have a little bit of access to counterplay in that you can take a sunset B main approach and constantly withdraw your trips until the salvo is on cooldown, then replace them. If you happen to be on a Killjoy, well, sorry to break it to you, you're completely out of luck. This, of course, doesn't even take into consideration the rest of our composition and its ability to stopgap any holes that we may have. For instance, you may point out A main here as being open season, but then you have to remember we have the air pop raise nade that's been used for the last year or so to clear out the front of that site. It's a bit of a shock to me that we've seemingly forgotten a lot of lessons of the past with Tejo. We saw with double nade raise already that having access to a high volume of high potency pop damage probably not balanced, and yet here we are with it on a 40-second non-contingent cooldown. We also learned the lesson with pre-patch 404 Astra that having access to disentrenchment utility that has multi-level Y-axis penetration, that's probably not okay. In fact, the place that we learned that for the most part, at least by my eye test, was on Fracture A, where a single suck could completely deny any sort of on-site anchoring there. Pretty ironic that now we get something that has that attribute again, right as Fracture re-enters the pool. Good luck with that one.
You're about to get pinched. Even the Nanoswarm does get a chance to do something.
And while I say all of this, my intention is not to be all doom and gloom and to just dunk on this design. I think that zone denial as a means of catalytic utility is indisputably a niche that deserves to be in Valorant and is something that we've already seen in varying capacities with agents like Breach. I just also think that there's a line that shouldn't be crossed and we're currently multiple steps past it. I've already spoken about my recommended fixes in a tweet, but there are a few I want to highlight here. Option number 1 is to remove the utility damage from Salvo and increase its cooldown. This leaves the ability as a truly specialized zone denial catalytic tool, but now it's one that comes with the real opportunity cost of weaker defaults. Option number 2, meaningfully decrease the damage of Salvo and increase its cooldown. This one, on its face, is tricky because you could argue that it takes away the move or die mantra of the agent. I'll be honest, I have no counterpoint to that other than that I believe move or die shouldn't have a place in design in the first place. At least not in a form where it doesn't take concerted, coordinated effort from multiple players. In terms of affording my players compelling decision points, I don't want their choice to be a binary outcome. I want them to be able to move or take a risk. The risk being that they could die to a util combo with the salvo, or that they could survive the salvo but still have taken so much damage they're now meaningfully disadvantaged in future fights. This approach better achieves the design goal of ensuring that gunplay is still the deciding factor in in-game interactions, and it does so in a way where the player's choices are less linear and better rewarded for understanding circumstantial details. Maybe my opponent's composition doesn't have enough utility to actually combo kill me, so I can afford to take that damage and take the risky line. Maybe they haven't conditioned it effectively, so maybe there are a couple of those on-site positions that I now believe are somewhat playable because they can't present that combo kill in enough locations to not give me the opportunity to high roll. What ends up being the question is, would that make Tejo less of an initiator? And I would say no. He's still generating material advantage for his teammates when they take their duels. Ultimately, why have I made this video though? I don't think it's any secret that Tejo is a very pushed agent. Hell, in the designer's preview of him, they mentioned the fact they expect him to be really oppressive, and I think that's their sort of incognito way of saying, yeah, we've overtuned the hell out of him and we know it. I guess it really just boils down to two things. The first thing is what most of this video's been about. While I understand that overtuning happens, it's part of games, and there's nothing implicitly wrong with it, I do think that Tejo goes a step beyond simple overtuning. There are parts of this kit that are frankly not healthy for the game. And I believe that those are something worth putting a spotlight on and taking note of, because while I think they're perfectly fine in the short term to force a little bit of meta shift and to create something new and exciting in the game, in the longer run, this level of robbed agency from opponents is not compelling enough to be worth it. The second is just how impactful I expect this agent to be. I can say he's overtuned, I can say that he has dangerous design, but I truly mean it when I say you can and probably should be playing this agent on 7 maps currently. He is of that power level, he causes that level of forced adaptation from your opponent that I truly cannot think of a situation where you should not be running him, other than we do not have the runway for implementation. I fully expect that the defining element of who wins and loses kickoffs will be who has implemented Tejo the fastest, who has implemented him the best, and who runs into opponents who didn't manage to do that and has an easier path to victory as a result. But you don't have to take my word for it. Kickoffs will be starting in probably a couple of hours from the time this video goes live. So let me know how wrong or right I am down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.